This is a day that finds Israeli troops massing on the border with Gaza, Israeli planes hitting Gaza, the nature of the atrocities within Israel still being revealed, the hostages that were taken in Gaza. In fact, one of the hostage phones, this I think is a 23-year-old guy whose phone pinged right along the border of Gaza, close to the entry into Israel. That's the last ping they got from it. So much going on here. I want to talk to this guy about Netanyahu, about Israel, about ties to Iran, about the very real rumor that's out there. It's being talked about and reported on that Egypt gave Israel warning that this was going to happen, and that Israel actually was aware of these movements and, if you will, these run-throughs for what was going to happen, but they didn't feel it to be something that was actually going to happen, meaning it looked like a military exercise that they felt would never be followed through on. That and more, and his general take on things. He knows the region so well. This is the great John Rothmann, everybody. Hi, John.
Morning, Mark.
So, John, I want to start first with what happened and the atrocities. And the reason I do is because I feel that part of this story has changed, as I was saying at the beginning of the show, the way in which we look at and see a righteousness to the punch back that Israel will do. In fact, I thought it was notable that Biden, in his remarks, sort of essentially said, Israel has the right to, he didn't say punch back, but I think he said strike back, or he made no reference to like restraint. And I think that was in part because of the wanton violence and atrocities perpetrated. Speak to that, and then we'll get to the region itself.
You're exactly right. Israel has a green light from the President of the United States to go forward. You must understand the trauma in Israel. The idea that across their border came members of Hamas committing unspeakable horrors, beheading children, murdering families. I mean, there are no words. In Israel, there is a feeling that next to the Holocaust, this is the most vicious assault on Jews, as Jews, that we have ever been exposed to. And I say we, speaking as a Jew, I can tell you, I find this to be one of the most painful, difficult periods. There was a book written in 1969. Here it is, If Israel Lost the War. And it depicts in the book, written by three Newsweek novelists, it depicts what would have happened had Israel lost the war. And much of the criticism of the book was that it was painting a picture of atrocities that no one would ever commit. And I might add, the same thing applied to our book, Icon of Evil, Hitler's Mufti and the Rise of Radical Islam. Chapter 4 of our book depicted what would have happened if Hitler had won the war. And we were criticized roundly because we suggested that the wrath would have been horrific. Now, let me just be crystal clear. That is the reason why Israelis are so disturbed and outraged. I listened to Yair Lapid, who is one of the leaders of the opposition, the head of the opposition, who reminded us all that his father survived the Holocaust. I knew Tommy Lapid, and I can tell you that all of the images, all of the feelings rush back to Jews and Israelis, and yes, all good people of conscience, no matter what their point of view. The revelations yesterday, photographs which I have seen, to be honest with you, but which have not been made public, are so horrific that the outrage is growing. Now, please understand, this has brought Israel together. You cited earlier the editorial in Haaretz, which is one of the leading newspapers in Israel. It is a newspaper that is highly critical of Benjamin Netanyahu. And I want to make my position clear on a couple of things as we proceed. First of all, this is not something of Israel's doing. If you read the Hamas covenant, Article 7, it quotes the Hadith, one of the commentaries on the Quran. And the words are these: if a Jew should hide behind a rock or a tree, let the rock or the tree cry out, there is a Jew behind me. Come and kill him. This is appalling. Now, you mentioned the question of Egypt and perhaps a leak from them that something was being planned. The same thing happened in 1973. Nasser, the late president of Egypt, his own son-in-law, tipped off the Israelis. But it's hard to conceive, to imagine that any such atrocity would be committed. And this morning I was appalled when the State Department spokesman and the spokesman for the president on foreign affairs said that they did not have a smoking gun to prove that Iran was directly implicated. Let me be clear. Iran has been financing, supporting, providing the rockets that are being fired, not only the rockets being fired now from Gaza, but also in the north with Nasrallah, who has 150,000 rockets. And if you're listening to the reports moments ago, it appears they're getting ready to fire them. The Israelis view this as an existential threat, as, well, no one wants to say it, but the potential for the destruction of Israel. This morning, Mr. Kirby was asked in his briefing whether or not he had been in contact, or the White House had been in contact with the Palestinian Authority. And that is led, of course, by Mahmoud Abbas. Let me be crystal clear. Abbas is in a terrible position. Why has he not held an election to replace him as president? Remember, his term expired more than a decade ago. The reason is because Hamas would win overwhelmingly. Israel now confronts a situation that is a horror. Gaza in the south. Lebanon is not involved, but Nasrallah, who occupies southern Lebanon with his group Hezbollah, a potential threat to all of northern Israel. You understand 150,000 rockets? If they were to rain down on Israel in the north, hitting Tel Aviv and Haifa and the whole north of Israel, the destruction would make what's happening in Gaza look like child's play.
This is a very good point that John's just made, and I just want to underscore it. And then I have a couple of follow-ups to what you just said, John.
Sure.
And the thing I want to underscore is that John is so right that the advanced nature of the technology and the missiles that would fire from southern Lebanon, from Hezbollah, they could take out Israel. Absolutely. I mean, they would destroy Israeli cities. They have far more accuracy and power than do those that were fired out of the Gaza Strip. But there was quite a lot of destruction done by those as well.
You may have heard, I just have to interject, the French, who had the mandate over Lebanon for many years and who were deeply involved in Lebanon, or have been, the French have warned Nasrallah not to fire the rockets, because everyone understands exactly what you have said, Mark. It would be an unmitigated disaster. And I just want to finish up on this point about Iran. Iran is responsible for Hamas. It is responsible for Hezbollah in Lebanon. And the administration, if this is the policy, is completely wrong not to say that Iran is directly responsible.
And that brings me to the follow-up. Thank you. Because the Wall Street Journal reported over the weekend that there was the trail of breadcrumbs back to Iran. I haven't seen any reporting that supports that apart from the Wall Street Journal piece. And as you've just noted, the U.S. government and other government entities around the world don't actually provide us a link, a smoking gun, to use the phrase used in America.
It has smoking rockets.
No, exactly.
That come from Iran.
So let me bring my question to you, please, sir, and that is, are the Americans deliberately covering up the fact that they know Iran was? I did a whole opening about how Iran, and you've buttressed that point. Yeah. I mean, that Hezbollah, Hamas is Iran. Okay, they're a proxy terrorist group for Iran. But I believe that it's possible the Americans may know that the Iranians actually did engineer this moment, this entire thing, but they don't want to bring that evidence to bear because they don't want a wider conflict. What do you think of that?
My brother Bill called me this morning and asked me the same question. And my answer was America wants to avoid at all costs a direct confrontation with Iran. It makes perfect sense because the minute Iran becomes a central player and named player, the war in the Middle East will be catastrophic. And so I understand why Admiral Kirby obfuscated, and that is the word, he obfuscated. He didn't say they weren't, he didn't say they were. He said we don't have a smoking gun, that they were responsible for this operation. Let me be perfectly clear. There could have been no operation without Iran providing the missiles, the funds, and the training. And so this is a very awkward moment. It's a very difficult moment because nobody wants a broader war in the Middle East. But if Nasrallah decides to fire off his arsenal of weapons, 150,000 rockets, there is no way that Iron Dome can shoot them down. They'll hit a few of them, but the impact will be incredible. By the way, just before I came on with you, there was a report that just as was the case in Gaza, that they are flying into northern Israel now with terrorists. So this is a big issue. The Israelis, by the way, have put 40,000 troops on the northern border because they understand. They're calling up the reserves, not only in Gaza, but in the north, because they understand the problem. Now, I don't want to be overly dramatic, Mark. I don't want to be overly emphatic, but please understand, if you talk as I have with friends in Israel, they believe that this is an existential threat to the very survival of the state of Israel. And they are going to respond with full force. One example that was given, which I think is good, can you imagine if rockets were fired from Canada or Mexico into the United States, what our response would be? Now, let me say a word about the Palestinians. I think it's very important to understand. The people of Gaza, some of whom support Hamas, some of whom oppose Hamas, have no say in this at all. Hamas rules with an iron fist, and the people of Gaza are the ones who will be ultimately great victims. But I ask people to consider this with great care. What choice does Israel have? If you read the revelations from this morning, beheading children, taking Holocaust survivors into Gaza, shooting children in front of parents and parents in front of children. When you see the carnage and you listen, whether you watch MSNBC or Fox or CNN, and you listen to the people who are talking about what happened, and I hate to say it, what is happening, I can tell you there will be no restraint on Israel's part. None at all. We have one other thing to watch for. Gaza is being hit. Will Hamas fulfill its threat to kill hostages? They don't say kill them alone. No. They're going to film the killing and put that film on social media. And I think Kim mentioned the fact that Jewish kids and students are being urged not to deal with social media now because the images emerging are so horrific.
One of the reasons that I've kind of talked this through, and I actually had a conversation with Albert about this prior to us beginning the show today, as opposed to showing a bunch of video reports, is because I feel on the one hand that we need to see the horror, and yet on the other hand, I don't want this to become sort of horror porn, like where I feel there's a part of this that's so inhuman, so grotesque, and I don't want to be part of putting those images out.
May I point out to you, I chaired the Holocaust commemoration here in San Francisco for 25 years. And on the 50th anniversary of the liberation from the camps, we used a letter written by Dwight D. Eisenhower, actually a message, which he sent to Washington, saying what I witnessed here is so horrific. Please send reporters. Send reporters. It shouldn't come from the army. It shouldn't come from us. Let reporters cover it. And you know what, Mark? What did Israel do? Exactly that. They just had, I believe it's about 50 or 60 reporters from around the world who were allowed to see firsthand what has happened. Only by witnessing, even if we never see the images. And I'm not showing images, and you're not showing images, but everyone needs to imagine in their wildest nightmare such barbarity. And this is not directed against the Palestinian people as a whole. It is directed against a terror organization. And I believe that the Israelis are more interested in obliterating this existential threat than anything else on their agenda. By the way, you did note, or if you didn't, I will, that there is now a national unity cabinet which has been formed in Israel. Even those like Haaretz who have been critical of Benjamin Netanyahu understand that there must be unity in Israel. And I would remind you that on the eve of the Six-Day War, once Israel realized what was happening, a national unity government was organized wall to wall. For Israelis, this is, and I want to underline it, an existential threat. May I say one more thing, Mark? And I know you have many questions, but I have a very good friend who lives in Haifa. She happens to be here in Northern California now. She's one of the leaders of the peace movement. She's never voted for a right-wing party. She's always voted for the most left-wing party. She and her husband, who is a native Israeli, born and raised on kibbutz, are people who have been devoted to peace, devoted to peace. She sent me an email this morning filled with anguish, with pain, with a modicum of fear. And that's what we have to understand. Anyway.
I'm glad you mentioned that, and I just want to pick up on that for a moment, and then I'm going to double back and ask you a follow-up. And what I'm going to pick up on is the fact that it's quite ironic that the people killed, slaughtered, beheaded, the people who were killed were in large number peaceniks. They were actually trying to bridge the gap between Israel and the Arabs or Palestinians. There is the case of the teachers who taught in a school designed to include Arabic and Hebrew. They taught in both languages. They wanted to see the region as one.
The program, by the way, is called Hand in Hand, and I served on their founding board. The fellow who founded it is a former student of mine, an old friend of mine. And we helped to provide funding for that organization as well.
Well, this teacher and his wife were slaughtered, and they worked to, as I say, bridge that gap. But I want to double back now and ask you about the Netanyahu government, because there's a bizarre, this is truly bizarre conspiracy theory, and I can knock it down in this moment, that Netanyahu actually wanted this because he wanted it. Netanyahu is the biggest loser in all. The biggest loser. I'm talking about politically. Obviously, the grotesque nature of what happened is, that involves horror. But politically, he wanted to go around the judiciary. Forget about that now. Now you have this coalition government that you've talked about, John. So that's going to be backburnered. Netanyahu will lose tremendous support in Israel. He'll be blamed for this. It certainly happened on his watch. The intelligence community, this vaunted intelligence community, has now been smeared in every way. Netanyahu is a huge loser through this. The notion that he could have in any way wanted this is ludicrous to me. Please.
Let me point out that one of the greatest leaders in Israel's history was Golda Meir. And Golda Meir in 1973, when the war broke out, was blamed and criticized and ultimately forced to resign, as was her defense minister, Moshe Dayan. Recrimination is going to follow. But today, on this day, and for the foreseeable weeks ahead, Benjamin Netanyahu will have the support of almost the entire country because it is an existential threat. There's one thing you must understand. Israelis, and I would say Jews, have a tendency to fight among themselves, to be very vigorous in their protestations. But when there is an existential threat to the very survival of not only Israel, but the Jewish people. They come together. Somebody said to me, and I want to repeat this almost verbatim, boy, they went after Israelis. What do you think of that? And I said, oh, no, 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 no. They didn't just go after Israelis. They went after Jews. They went after Jews wherever they are in the world. The reason Hamas is so hateful, the reason they are so horrific, is because we have now seen the proof of what, frankly, I wrote about in Icon of Evil many years ago, and what we have talked about repeatedly and whenever I teach a course on the Middle East. When you have people cry out, Allah Akbar, God is great, as they murder and kill and pillage, you're not dealing with rational people. One other quick point. Somebody asked me today, well, if Hamas is destroyed and thrown out of Gaza, will the Palestinian Authority be asked to assume responsibility there? That's a possibility. But I want to point out to you that the Palestinian Authority is a complete failure. It is a fiction. It is propped up by the West. That Mahmoud Abbas, who is now 85 years old, has proven to be a completely impotent leader. So there is a serious question. If you remove Hamas, and they will be removed, what do you replace them with? There are about 2.5 million, maybe a little less, people in Gaza. What will be the outcome for them? And I want you to know, I bear no grudge against people as people, but I would remind you what has been stated by Democrats and Republicans in Congress. When we fought the war against Japan, and when we fought the war against Germany, we fought it as an all-out war. We demanded unconditional surrender, not because we hated the Japanese people, not because we hated the Germans as a people, but because there was a determination that unless we, the Allies, won the war, we would never be rid of what happened. The hope, and I say this with all, first time I've said it publicly, the hope is that as Hamas is defeated unconditionally, that out of the ashes of this tragedy will emerge what happened at the end of World War II, a democratic Japan and a democratic Germany. That's what we have to hope. But in the meantime, the number of people who will die, innocent people who will die.
Yeah, the price paid will be huge.
Unbelievable.
Absolutely right. Yeah,
I
want to follow up on that because you mentioned, if you remove Hamas from Gaza, if you can get rid of Hamas, once Hamas is defeated, I hear all of these things. Guys, and I will ask you, Rothmann, it could take years to get rid of Hamas. I mean, this idea somehow you go in, you blow everything up, you go house to house, you root out Hamas, and what are you guys thinking? A month, 2 months, 3 months? No. Hamas is really a huge part of that, and with huge support from Iran. I don't see Hamas being just plucked out of Gaza and out of their influence. So
I agree completely. You're right. And may I say something else? You cannot destroy an idea. And let me tell you, every day that Israel pursues what it has to pursue, more and more Arab and Muslim individuals will rise up to condemn Israel. We're already seeing it. We're hearing that condemnation. So it's a simple question, Mark. And I ask our listeners, and maybe they will offer you their thoughts. What do you do? And I want to use a word. It's called appeasement. We saw what appeasement brought in 1938 and 39. Are we talking about somehow appeasing them or cutting a deal with them? How do you cut a deal with these people? And may I say, many people were upset with Benjamin Netanyahu when he came to the United States and spoke to the Congress, condemning the Iranian nuclear program. He was right. And we, in a sense, appeased. We tried to cut a deal with Iran. You cannot make a deal with radical Islam or with terrorists. And may I say that even when this war is over, the tragedy of what has happened will continue. This is not an issue that's going to go away in a few weeks or a few months. It'll be with us, I'm afraid for a very long time.
Well, I think that is indisputable. And on the Iran deal, I would argue, and it's odd to hear you say it, you can't make a deal with these people. You have to make a deal with these people. Those are the people, and they're about to have nukes. You got to make a deal with them, or you just let them have nukes. There's no.
No, there is something else, Mark. And let me assure you, if Iran is involved, I always remember what the Israelis did to the nuclear reactor in Baghdad. The Israelis have already subverted, to a degree, through technology, the Iranian nuclear program. If, in fact, it comes to that, there are two targets that we will use against Iran: the oil fields and the nuclear program. And the United States has made clear, Democrats and Republicans alike, that that will be the outcome. I mean, all you have to do is.
John, I mean, I don't want to get into this in a big way, but when you say the oil fields and the nuclear, so you want to bomb the oil fields and bomb the
No,
what
they'll
are you
cut
talking
off
about?
their ability. No, they wouldn't destroy the oil fields. They destroy the Iranian ability to pump the oil and remove the oil.
You're saying
and make money
using
from the oil.
technology or using armaments?
Well, that's a very good question, Mark. I can't answer that question, but I can tell you that if Iran's situation were to grow and were there to be a confrontation, as we suggested earlier, with Iran's proxies, I would say all bets are off. The world cannot afford to have a radical Islamic regime control the oil pipelines or the potential for a nuclear cataclysm. And so
well, I'd love to talk more about the. I feel as though this is the problem in the Middle East, is that I don't want to do business with these guys. I don't want to negotiate because they're bent on my destruction. I understand that, but I feel as though the alternative, and you've just suggested, maybe the alternative is that you can keep a lid on it without any kind of formal agreement. Okay, I'll accept that. Ask John what's happening. Randy says, what's happening now? What's happening now will derail any Israeli agreement with Saudi Arabia. I don't understand why it should derail any agreement. Can you speak to that, please, John?
All right, I want to explain this. It's a fascinating question. Remember, Iran is Shiite, but the Saudis are Sunni. Remember that the survival of the Saudi family has been a top priority of every American president since Franklin D. Roosevelt. We understand the atrocities that the Saudis commit. We saw it with the murder of that journalist, Khashoggi, and we've seen it through the years. But we understand that if the Saudi family is overthrown, the name of that peninsula will not be Saudi Arabia. Saudi is the name of a family. It'll be the Islamic Republic of Arabia. So we are going to support the Saudi family. Now, the Saudis are confronting Iran. They are furious that Joe Biden and Benjamin Netanyahu and those who have been part of the Abraham Accords have worked out a deal between Saudi Arabia and Israel. Not even a peace treaty, a normalization of relations. Let me point this out to you, Mark, and listen carefully. Should there be a military confrontation with Iran, the way to get there is over Saudi territory. And I will guarantee you that the Saudis will say, come right on. There is a battle going on between the Islamic Republic of Iran and the Saudi royal family. How that manifests itself will be interesting. In the end, I believe with perfect faith that there will be an agreement between the Israelis and the Saudis. They will make an agreement because it is in their self-interest. And the question then becomes, as we have made a deal with the devil all these years, Saudi Arabia, would the Israelis be willing to make the deal? And the answer is yes.
The Saudis and the Israelis have always had a tacit agreement, John, right? And when I say always, certainly in the last couple of decades. So this would have formalized.
Right. Absolutely.
Yeah.
And that's why I made the point. Every American president has been committed to the maintenance of the Saudi family on the throne of the Arabian Peninsula. If the Saudis were overthrown, all bets would be off.
Question about the Gazans. As you said, there are so many who don't support Hamas. Hamas is essentially this, it's a mafia, if you will. with tremendous support from Iran, and they rule with an iron hand. And all the money that's poured into Gaza through the years has gone into, not into the people, not into building up Gaza. Gaza was built up, actually, when the Israelis pulled out. You can speak to this better than I can, but there
Yes.
were orchards, and there were factories and pharmacies, and there was and then
Do you know what Hamas said when they took over? We would rather see the land in flames than rebuilt by Jews. That's
they
what they
literally
said.
set fire to the orchards,
They did.
Acapulco
And the hot
orchards,
houses.
and,
The hot houses, which were a tremendous growing industry. They
It's-
rejected the idea of expanding the port of Gaza. The Israelis said, let us make Gaza the Singapore of the Middle East. Let us make Gaza the Switzerland of the Middle East. Let's make sure we can do that. Do you know what happened when Hamas took over in Gaza? I want you to understand they took their fellow Palestinians from the Palestinian Authority and threw them off the tallest roofs. And if you don't believe me, you can see it. They took the images, as Hamas has taken images now of what they have done. This is barbaric, and we're dealing with people who are barbarians. And
there is a new level of barbarism, or maybe not so new.
Let me just new, it's old.
Let me get back to the Gazans, though.
Sure.
So they're not supporters of Hamas per se. They're intimidated by Hamas. What happens here? It's such a grim end game, John. And I don't know what the end game is, what the goals are on either side.
Egypt is talking with Israel about a corridor which would allow Gazans to leave Gaza and go to El Arish. If you look at a map, El Arish is to the south. It would not represent a strategic threat to Israel because it's not on the border. And the question is whether they'll do it. Now, Hamas issued a statement this morning that not one citizen of Gaza will be allowed to leave. And then they said, and no one wants to leave. So understand that the other thing Hamas has done is to create human shields. But that's the answer, really. And I got to tell you, there was a woman who was interviewed, I think, on CNN from the Palestinian Children's Group, which sends doctors in on a regular basis. She's in favor of peace. She's leaving. They're terrified. And so...
Again, the irony of this entire thing is that so many killed were committed to peace. That's why they were there in the region.
Yeah,
they were trying to make a difference. And it's been argued, I think, quite effectively that Hamas doesn't want to see peace. They want to see the end of Israel.
Did you hear the story about the woman who assists in birthing of children? Thousands of children. She's now either dead or a hostage in Gaza. She didn't care whether the children were Jews or Muslims, whether they were members of PLO or Hamas. She serviced all of them. Thousands of births she helped. And, well, look, I haven't even mentioned what happened in the dance party in Israel. Do you know the dance party that was held near the border was a peace party to celebrate peace? And what does Hamas do? They come in and they slaughter. I mean, don't listen to John Rothmann or Mark Thompson. No, subscribe to the Mark Thompson program, but don't listen to us on this. Look at the film and see it.
It was a brutal thing, and it continues. I mean, it was a brutal attack, punctuated by grotesque, wanton violence and atrocities, and as you say, perpetrated on those arguably most committed to peace among Israelis. A terrible thing. John, I appreciate your time. I appreciate your viewpoint.
Mark, may I say one
deep
more
knowledge.
thing? I know that Kim commented briefly on the House Speaker election. There will be evidently a vote on the floor of the House this afternoon or early evening. Steve Scalise is the choice of the Republican caucus by a narrow but significant margin. Scalise, as you pointed out, by the way, he's no moderate in any sense of the word, but he was martyred, if you will, when he was shot at the practice for the baseball game, the congressional baseball game. Scalise has been the majority leader. He will now be the candidate for speaker. They must, in the House of Representatives, bring the House back to order with a speaker. I would not vote for Steve Scalise for many reasons, including your allusion to his quote about David Duke. But I also want to point out that on the Democratic side, Rashid Tlaib, a member of the House of Representatives from Minnesota, was asked to comment on the question of what's happened in Gaza, and she walked away from the microphone. She has a Palestinian flag in front of her office. The Democrats are going to have to deal with their issues as the Republicans are going to have to deal with theirs. And we've spent this time, and I know we'll do it again. And by the way, I'm available to you any morning you want me for a few minutes to talk about this, because what Mark Thompson does is so important and it must be supported. But I want you to understand clearly, the next few weeks are going to be unbelievable. And one of the things the world is looking at, the Chinese, the Russians, everyone, can democracy function in the United States in the House of Representatives? The Democrats cannot elect a speaker. The Republicans must elect a speaker, even if it's somebody I personally don't support, in order for the House to do its business. And to his credit, Steve Scalise today had an American and Israeli flag lapel and said the first action of the House of Representatives under a Speaker Scalise will be to appropriate money and support for Israel. I just want to point that out. This is not a partisan issue, nor should it be a partisan issue. We have to move forward. And Mark, thank you so much. I know it's the first anniversary tomorrow. To be honest with you, I wish we were still back at KGO, where we had a forum every single day and where, frankly, millions of people could tune in. But I'm grateful to you and to Kim and to Albert, the team, for keeping this going. Everyone needs to understand we need this forum. We need this opportunity. So I'll make the pitch if you won't. He's celebrating his first year anniversary tomorrow. Everybody contribute. I don't care whether it's $1 or $10 or $100 or $1,000. In order to maintain this kind of a broadcast, you have to support it. And Mark, I commend you for doing it. And when you talk to your parents, tell them how proud we are of what you are doing, and we salute you.
Thank you so much, John. I will avail us of your offer, because I think during this time we'll want some additional input along the way when it comes to what's happening in the Middle East. So John Rothmann, everybody. Thanks, John. Around the Political World with John Rothmann is the podcast, and check it out every day. Thank you, John.
The Mark Thompson Show.
Hi, it's Mark, and I thought that was great. Hit the notification bell. You'll know whenever there's a new video being dropped, and please subscribe to our channel to help us save the universe.